Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Shri Chaitanya Prasadena Tadrupasya Vinirnayam Balopi Kurute Shastram Dristva Vraja Vilasinihi. Om Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Shri Ganesha Sharada Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Welcome, dear devotees. So, for completeness' sake, we are going to go back into some Bhagavad Gita to start. We left off at kind of the first section of chapter 4, talking about the avatar, talking about how Krishna is revealing this other type of yoga, this yoga that he has called karma yoga, that in this chapter he calls jnana yoga, or karma sannyasa yoga, the yoga of renunciation of action, and what he will ultimately call bhakti yoga in leading up, especially in the subsequent chapters. In contrast to the familiar type of yoga that we get referred to in the text by Krishna as dhyana yoga or samkhya yoga or jnana yoga, uses that term as well, meaning this yoga of asceticism, this yoga where one doesn't engage in the world, but one goes and becomes a mendicant, often an ascetic in the forest, what we traditionally think of as a yogi. But this yoga, which Krishna says that, which Krishna most often refers to just as yoga, he often doesn't put any quality. Buddhi yoga is the other term he's used for it, yoga of intelligence. And this is a yoga in which one is situated within the world, that one can perform while situated in the world. And this in many ways is a revolutionary idea. I think we talked about this a little bit before, but one of when we first start getting, of course, this text we believe is 5,000 years old. It's like a very ancient text passed down orally before it was ever written down. But the first versions of it that we find written down in the modern era, what we could call the modern era, about like 500 to 100 BCE. It was this time in which Buddhism was on the rise, Jainism was on the rise. Some of these more radical, what are called shramana movements within the Vedic tradition, even within the Upanishadic tradition, where people are leaving their homes, leaving their families, becoming monks, going off and doing tapasya for liberation. And the Bhagavad Gita, if scholars say, in order to reestablish the authority of the old Vedic order, but according to, I think, the text itself, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita why this text came up again is Krishna is presenting a way of living in which that we can renounce all of our karma, all of our activities, by identifying all of those activities with bhakti yoga, with devotional service, with yajna, with sacrifice. We all have to sacrifice something in this world. And so when the Gita talks about sacrifice, it talks about what we do with the resources we have, with the artha that we have, with the position that we have. we have been given so many things in this body. We have been given hamkar, we have eye sense, we've been given a position, we've been given relations, we've been given responsibilities. And to view all of these aspects of our lives with this divine vision that Krishna really brings out in this chapter is a way for us to attain Brahma Jnana, knowledge of Brahman, not just talking about this kind of impersonal Brahma Gyan. Brahma Gyan in its most general sense, knowledge of God in whatever form that we realize them as. We can acquire through our everyday activities. So we left off about text 16. It says, even the intelligent are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction. Now I shall explain to you what action is, knowing which you shall be liberated from all of misfortune. The intricacies of action, the intricacies of karma are very hard to understand. Therefore, one should properly know what karma action is, what forbidden action is, sinful action, vikarma, bad karma, and what akarma is, inaction. So Krishna is laying out three different aspects of karma: karma, vikarma, and akarma. If one is serious about liberation from material bondage, one has to understand the distinctions between action, inaction, and unauthorized action. One has to apply oneself to such an analysis of action, reaction, and perverted actions because it is a very different subject matter. To understand Krishna consciousness and action according to its modes, one has to learn one's relationship with the Supreme, i.e., one who has learned perfectly knows that every living entity is the eternal servitor of the Lord, and that consequently one has to act in Krishna consciousness. The entire Bhagavad Gita is directed towards this conclusion. Any other conclusions against this consciousness and its attendant actions are vikarmas, or prohibited actions. To understood all this, one has to associate with authorities in Krishna consciousness and learn the secret from them. This is as good as learning from the Lord directly. Otherwise, even the most intelligent persons would be bewildered. So we don't know what we're supposed to do in this material world. Like, we're introduced to this concept of karma. Like, what does that mean for me? I think karma, this topic can get our thoughts racing, like I have to worry about this and this and this and this. But Krishna has prepared us for this because as we see in the coming verses, he tells us how to solve this conundrum. This is an important verse. Karmani akarma yapashed akarmani chakarma yaha sad bhutimam manushyeshu sayukta krishna karma krit. One who sees inaction in action and action in inaction is intelligent among men, and he is in the transcendental position, although engaged in all sorts of activities. A person acting in Krishna consciousness is naturally free from the bonds of karma. His activities are performed for Krishna, and therefore he does not enjoy or suffer the effects of his work. Consequently, he is intelligent in human society, even though he is engaged in all sorts of activities for Krishna. Akarma means without reaction to work. The impersonalist ceases fruitive activities out of fear, so that the resultant action may not be a stumbling block to the path of self-realization. But the personalist knows rightly his position as an eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, he engages himself in activities of Krishna consciousness. Because everything is done for Krishna, he enjoys only transcendental happiness in discharge of this service. Those who engage in this process are known to be without desire for personal sense gratification. The sense of eternal servitorship to Krishna makes one immune to all reactionary elements of work. I love that. It's our inoculation. This service attitude of releasing all of our material attachments to truly kind of let go and let God, as they say in the 12 steps. And we're doing all these things. We're doing our work. We're doing our bhajan. We're doing our work, and we can we can, in a sense, let go of it. If we remain kind of attached to it, we get attached to, oh, I'm feeling it today, I'm not feeling it today. Right? I worship you, Ma. And this other person who's worshiping Ma is getting all these nice things. Why am I not getting? So our work, in a sense, when discharged as devotional service, does not become work in that it is not binding. Although we do not abstain from work either. One is understood to be in full knowledge, full jnana, whose every endeavor is devoid of sense gratification. He is said to be he is said by the sages to be a worker for whom the reactions of work have been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. Abandoning all attachments, karma phala asangam. So we're in sangha, which means coming together. Karma phala asangam. So he coming apart from the fruits of one's karma. Abandoning all attachment to the results of his activities, ever satisfied and independent, he performs no fruitive action, although engaged in all kinds of activities. He is nirashraya karmani. He's without shelter in action, but he is abhipravritaha. He is being fully pravriti. We distinguish paths like nivriti, like a world negating path, neti, not this, not this. And with a pravriti path, iti, tantra is like this. Nish talks a lot in this language. And so it's not that we don't perform actions, but our relationship to our actions is nishrayaha. We do not take shelter of our actions. We do not take shelter of our job. We do not take shelter of our duty in itself. We go and do our duties in so much as we are our ashram, right? Ashram is part of that word. It means shelter. Our shelter is in the Lord, who dispenses the fruits as he pleases. So this is how we prevent our worship from becoming shopkeeping religion, as Swami Vivekananda likes to say. I give something, you give something, right? Such a man of understanding acts with mind and intelligence perfectly controlled, gives up all sense proprietorship over his possessions, and acts only for the bare necessities of life. Thus working, he is not affected by sinful reactions, only seeking self-preservation, not more than self-preservation. This will when we come to Nectar of Instruction, that our whole thing is about this, like simple living, high thinking, that sort of thing. He who is satisfied with gain as it comes from its own accord, who is free from duality and does not envy, who is steady in both success and failure, is never entangled, although performing actions. So Krishna is saying that actions aren't the problem. It's our expectations from our actions which create the problem, which create the cycle. Because if we are trapped grasping after our next good reaction, our next fruit of our yajna, our sacrifice, our tapa, whether it's like being a cashier. Like if you ever wanted to do austerities, become a cashier. I'm sure everybody knows this, right? But we expect, oh, I'll have money to go, like buy some ice cream. Like it's a stupid example, but we were watching High School Musical. It's the second one, where they're all singing that song of like, we're gonna work, we're gonna work, and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna buy this thing, I'm gonna buy this thing. It was like, oh, hey, you're gonna like talking about buying cars and stereos, and I'm like, what kind of job do you have, like at a weird country club with like a piano and a swimming pool? Like, you're not gonna make any of that money. You have to work so much in order to get the little bit of sense gratification, right? That's what our next part of our class is about. But it's that expectation that creates more karma. It's that expectation that tells Ma, okay, you want more of this, I will give you more of this. you know? And sometimes that can bite us in the butt. I know it has for me. Only speaking for myself here. The work of a man who is unattached to the modes of material nature and who is fully situated, jnana of avashtita, who is sthita, established in transcendence. The work of a man who is unattached to the modes of material nature and is fully situated in transcendental knowledge merges entirely into transcendence. Yajnaya acharita karma, work in sacrifice to Krishna. Becoming fully Krishna conscious, one is freed from all dualities and thus is freed from the contaminations of material modes. He doesn't recognize good, bad. He doesn't recognize pleasant, unpleasant. He sees everything from the highest good, not with goods that these lower order goods that we have, our own, that are built up by our own ahankara, our own ego. He can become liberated because he knows that his constitutional position in relationship with Krishna, and thus his mind cannot be drawn from Krishna consciousness. Consequently, whatever he does for Krishna, who is the primeval Vishnu. Therefore, all of his works are technically sacrifices, because sacrifice aims at satisfying the Supreme Person or Krishna. The resultant reactions to all such works certainly merge into transcendence, and one does not suffer material effects. So whatever you are doing, it is merged, not some in transcendence. We kind of dualize between, oh, this is my spiritual life, this is my working life. Not true. According to 423, whatever his yagya is, whatever her yagya is, their yagya is, it is merged entirely in Brahman. And it comes to this very famous verse quoted by Nisht, which is translated in a very odd way by Srila Prabhupada. Brahmar pranam brahma havir brahma agno brahma hutam brahmaeva tena gantavyam brahma karma samadhina. So the offering into the fire is Brahman. The butter that goes in the fire is Brahman. The fire of the sacrifice is Brahman. And it is offered unto, and all of the sacrifices offered unto Brahman. And this is often a prayer said before meals, right? I know in the Amachi ashram they do Brahma Pranam, Brahma Havir. It's a grace prayer. A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. How activities in Krishna consciousness can lead ultimately to the spiritual goal described here. There are various activities in Krishna consciousness. All of them are described in the following verses. But for the present, just the principle of Krishna consciousness is described. A conditioned soul entangled in material contamination is sure to act in the material atmosphere, and yet he has to get out of such an environment. The process by which the conditioned soul can get out of the material atmosphere is Krishna consciousness. The materially absorbed conditioned soul can be cured by Krishna consciousness as set forth here in the Gita. This process is generally known as yagya, or activities, sacrifices, simply meant for Vishnu or Krishna. The more the activities of the material world are performed in Krishna consciousness, or for Vishnu, for God only, the more the atmosphere becomes spiritualized by complete absorption. The word Brahma means spiritual, of Brahman. The Lord is spiritual, and the rays of his transcendental body are called the Brahma Jyotir, his spiritual effulgence. Everything that exists is situated on that Brahma Jyotir. This is the impersonal God. This is the Sat Chit, devoid of Ananda, that one is absorbed in this kind of non-dual consciousness. But when the Jyotir is covered by illusion, maya, or sense gratification, it is called material. This material veil can be removed at once by Krishna consciousness. And thus the offering for the sake of Krishna consciousness, the consuming agent of such an offering or contribution, the process of consumption, the contributor, and the result are all combined together. Brahman, or the absolute truth. The absolute truth covered by Maya is called matter. Matter, dovetailed for the cause of the absolute truth, regains its spiritual quality. Krishna consciousness is the process of converting the illusory consciousness into Brahman, or the Supreme. When the mind is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness, it is said to be in samadhi, or trance. Anything done in such a transcendental consciousness is called yajna, or sacrifice for the absolute. In that condition of spiritual consciousness, the contributor, the contribution, the consumption, the performer or leader of the performance as a result or ultimate gain, everything becomes one in the absolute, the Supreme Brahman. This is the method of Krishna consciousness. Hari Bol. That's a damn good purport. My gosh. So much in there. But it reminds me, I think I must have mentioned this in 3 different classes, but it really appealed something to me, is that there's a story about Jayapataka Maharaj and Jayapataka Swami, big ISKCON guru, many disciples around the world. One of his first jobs when he first became a devotee was working at McDonald's, because he was working to they needed money for the temple, money for the early stuff, getting the movement going. This was when Prabhupada was on Second Avenue, and he had just come. One of these days, we're gonna have to do Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita study, like the life of Srila Prabhupada. It's very fascinating, beautiful pastimes. But he was ecstatic while sweeping the floor at McDonald's, even though, my Guruji once told a story about he was on the road and he had to stop in at a McDonald's to use the bathroom, but they made him buy something. So he bought a Sprite, and then on the way out, he threw it out. This is the level of purity standards, but Krishna gave Jayapataka Maharaj so much ecstasy, right? Because even that was utterly converted into a transcendental experience. Like, people come to Krishna consciousness and they take a job in the temple and they get so ecstatic washing pots. Why? It's the worst job of the temple. No one wants to wash the pots in the temple. My temple president tells a story about, there was a French lady at the Detroit temple who would always come to wash her pots. And she was late one day, and my temple president, he's a young devotee. He sees the pots. He's like, "Oh, I'll help out. I'll help out. I'll wash these pots for Krishna," right? And then the lady comes in, taps him on the shoulder, and very matter of factly says, "What are you doing? This is my service to Krishna." Right? Very sternly, and he goes, "Oh, man, I messed up." Right? So, like, this, even mundane things can be relished while given the spirit of devotional service. Holy Mother said this is the way we should do everything. Even small tasks are divine. One last story before we move on. My Param Guru, Swami Vishnu Devananda Saraswati of Allahabad, when he was visiting Kali Mandir, they were driving somewhere and Guruji had some sort of like crumpled like junk mail, like some, like store coupon, something like that. And Swami Vishnudevana very carefully picked it up and very carefully folded it and very carefully put it. He says, "You shouldn't leave that there. That is the very form of Saraswati." Right? Words are Saraswati, right? And so what kind of vision, how would we relate to our surroundings if we actually had this vision? Daivam evapare yajnam yoginaha paryupashate. Some yogis perfectly worship the demigods by offering different sacrifices to them. Some offer sacrifices into the fire of the supreme Brahman. Sages can perform sacrifice. That's one way to perform karma yoga. Some, the unadulterated brahmacharis, sacrifice the hearing process and the senses in the fire of material control. And others, the regulated householders, sacrifice the objects of the senses into the fire of the senses. So we talk about, we're not supposed to act for sense enjoyment, but we are on Earth. What are we supposed to do? Like, we can't, like, if everything, eating, drinking, like, how, like, what kind of bad karma did your salad come from? You're vegan, like gluten free, like, well, gluten free doesn't have, like, oh, maybe, I don't know, the world is crazy world, but like, how much, even like the living beings, that the bugs, the mosquitoes, the mice, like in the harvesting, in order to live, we have to commit bad karma. right? We have to indulge our senses. We're driven to indulge our senses, and that means consumption of other living entities. But for householders, for those who are engaging with the world, so brahmacharis, it says they sacrifice the hearing process. This is one of the many yagyas that can be offered to the Lord. This yagya of hearing, you and I are doing this yagya of hearing right now, and they're sent into this fire of mental control. This is what yogis do. Householders sacrifice objects of the senses into the fire of the senses. So the fire, when our life undergoes this divinization process, the process of bhakti yoga, then our senses can be converted, and what was once a mundane sensory experience can be a divine sensory experience. And anyone who's ever had a gulab jamun at midnight on Janmashtami knows. Daoji knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. Others who are interested in achieving self-realization, through control of the mind and senses, jnana, offer all of the functions of senses and of the life breath as oblations into the fire of the controlled mind. One can perform yoga through this intense meditation. This again, this tapa, this other kind of yoga is also a sacrifice. Having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions, others by performing severe austerities, or by practicing the yoga of eightfold mysticism, that's Ashtanga yoga, or by studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge. Yoga yajna, it's called, this process of Ashtanga yoga that can be offered. Still others who are inclined to the process of breath restraint and to remain in trance practice offering the movement of the outgoing breath into the incoming and the incoming breath into the outcoming, and thus at last remain in trance, stopping all breathing. This is a yogic technique, right? As yogis, when we do asana, we offer our breath to the divine. Others, curtailing the eating process, offer the outgoing breath into itself as a sacrifice. These are probably mentions of different yogic techniques. Okay. All these practices who know the meaning of sacrifice become cleansed of sinful reactions, and having tasted the nectar of the results of sacrifice, they advance towards the supreme and eternal atmosphere. O best of the Kuru dynasty, without sacrifice, one can never live happily on this planet or in this life. What then of the next? We can do nothing without sacrifice. You got to serve somebody, like Bob Dylan says. All these different types of sacrifice are approved by the Vedas, and all of them are born of different types of work, of different types of karma. Knowing them as such, you will be liberated. Our karma determines, in some respects, our offering. One of the best advice I got early in my walk was focus on doing what you like to do for Krishna. What you are apt to do for Krishna, and the rest follows after that. O chastiser of the enemy, the sacrifice performed in knowledge is better than the mere sacrifice of material possessions. After all, O son of Pritha, all sacrifices of work culminate in jnana. All sacrifices of work culminate in transcendental knowledge. You make your work an offering, you get jnana. Just try to learn the truth. Tad vidhi pranipatena pariprasnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattva darshanaha. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, a preceptor. Pranipatena. Inquire from him submissively, and pariprasnena sevaya, by submissive inquiries, render service. We render service to Guru through our questioning, through our searching, through our path. This is what the Guru is there to help us with. And Upadekshanti, like Upanishad, they will initiate you into knowledge. Tattva Jnana Darshana. You will be one who has darshan of tattva gyan, of the knowledge of tattva, of truth. Inquire from him submissively. So the way, the window into this work is to inquire of devotees. Someone who has realized knowledge, who has seen this truth. Only one who has tattva gyan actually can impart this to others. And how do we render service? Through our inquiry and through our service to their instructions, through following their instructions and living the spiritual life that we are called to live. Having obtained real knowledge from the self-realized soul, from a self-realized soul, you will never again fall into such illusion. For this real knowledge, you will see that all living beings are but part of the Supreme, or in other words, they are mine. Even if you are considered the most sinful of all sinners, papebhyaha sarve. When you are situated in the boat of transcendental knowledge, you will be able to cross over the ocean of miseries. As a blazing fire turns firewood to ashes, O Arjuna, so does the fire of jnana, of knowledge, burn to ashes all reactions of material activities. In this world, there is nothing so sublime as and pure as jnana. Such knowledge is the mature fruit of all mysticism. And one who has become accomplished in the practice of devotional service enjoys this knowledge within himself in due course of time. A faithful man who is dedicated to transcendental knowledge and who subdues his senses is eligible to achieve such knowledge, and having achieved it, he quickly attains supreme spiritual peace. But ignorant and faithless persons who doubt the revealed scriptures do not attain God consciousness. They fall down. For a doubting soul, there is no happiness, either in this world nor in the next. One who acts in devotional service, renouncing the fruits of his actions, and whose doubts have been destroyed by transcendental knowledge, is situated factually in the self. Therefore, he is not bound by reactions of work, O conqueror of riches. So it works if you work it, is another 12-step saying. If you have to, we can get, all of this sacrifice, like, oh, I'm living this way, a certain way for God. I'm not seeing anything. But in due course of time, right, we see the benefits of this. It's not an instant process, this yoga. It takes a lifetime. Tasmad ajnana sambhutam. Therefore, the doubts which have arisen in your heart out of ignorance should be slashed by the weapon of knowledge. Armed with yoga, O Bharata, stand and fight. The yoga system instructed in this chapter is called Sanatana Yoga, or eternal activities performed by the living entity. This yoga has two divisions of sacrificial actions. One is called the sacrifice of one's material possessions, and one is called knowledge of the self, which is pure spiritual activity. If sacrifice of one's material possessions is not dovetailed with spiritual realization, then such sacrifice becomes material. But one who performs such sacrifices with a spiritual objective or in devotional service makes a perfect sacrifice. I'm reminded of a story from the Katha Upanishad, where at the beginning, there is an old sage who decides to renounce the world. So he's giving away all of his possessions. And his son, Nachiketas, points out that, hey, Dad, all of the cows that you're giving away are old and not milk giving and kind of gross. All of the grain that you give is like spoiled. All of our fields are gnarly and like there's nothing actually to give here. And to whom will you give me? He says. And of course his answer is, to death I will give you. And he goes and has this encounter with Yamaraj. But at the beginning of the story, it's an example of an auspicious act that becomes inauspicious through our mindset. An auspicious thing that becomes tainted with ego. a sacrifice that isn't actually a sacrifice, that becomes material, that's taken down level. It doesn't mean it's still not beneficial. It's just not as effective, right? The solution that Krishna gives to Arjuna in order to have convert this one's life into this process is to inquire from a spiritual master. A bona fide spiritual master is in the disciplic succession from time eternal, and he does not deviate at all from the instructions of the Supreme Lord as they were imparted millions of years ago to the Sun God, from whom the wisdom of instructions of Bhagavad Gita have come down to this earthly kingdom. One should therefore follow the path of Bhagavad Gita as it is expressed in the Gita itself, and beware of self-interested people after personal aggrandizement who deviate others from the actual path. The Lord is definitely the supreme person, and his activities are transcendental. One who understands this is a liberated person from the beginning of his study of the Bhagavad Gita. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purports to the fourth chapter of Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of transcendental knowledge. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Beautiful.